Welcome to KBcast, the podcast for security executives, interviewing people from around the globe on how organizations can operate smarter and stay safer. Here's Carissa Breen.
I caught up with a friend and industry peer, Tulin Sevgin from UpGuard, and we talked about the risks associated with third-party vendors. Tulin talks through risk mitigation strategies that organizations can take. She sheds light on a few examples of when things have gone wrong and her experience and how companies have managed to overcome the incident and preserve the relationship not only with the client but also the vendor. If you're keen to learn more about Tulin's thoughts, then this episode is for you, so please keep on listening. Okay, so this has been a long time coming podcast, and it's weird because I keep saying it to like every guest that we have on here, saying I've been really wanting to get you on as a guest on the podcast. Yeah. And I know that you and I have spoken about it so many times, and I think what's really important about the work that you do is I think there's not enough focus on it. And you all know that I'm very particular when it comes to risk and compliance. So I thought what the best guest to get on would be yourself, Tulin. So welcome. I'm really excited to have this chat with you ultimately because, yes, you are a good friend of mine, but because you're a very knowledgeable professional practitioner as well. So I'm really keen to get started. So before we get started on your knowledge about risk management, can we talk a little bit more about your journey, like where you sort of started to what you're doing now?
Yeah, of course. So thanks for having me, for starters. It has definitely been a long time coming, so I'm very excited that it's finally happening here for us. Basically, just to start with, my career, just probably like majority of other people, started in a graduate program at one of the Big Four. And from there, it kind of opened my eyes to the different types of industries out there that you can work for and the different types of services and the different types of careers that you can have because at the Big Four, they've got different levels of services from accounting, finance, risk, security, the whole heap, right? So my first interest came from there into security when I was kind of brought onto some really cool projects that we had done with government. So they were more social engineering style projects. And that's kind of where my love kind of started for security. From there, I went in and out of security and tech from there. I went into high frequency trading. Did a couple of stints there in risk and also in IT and specifically focusing on, IT risk because that's very important in high frequency trading because everything is automated and, done by computers and coding. So that was very, very interesting for me. I was there for a little while and from there I jumped into the big banks. So, as you and I know, we've both worked at some of the big banks in Australia and, it's not what it seems like from the outside most of the time. I think it really depends which teams you work in and what you're focusing on. But I was in IT risk there, in technology risk and looking after specific different parts of the bank. And I didn't really enjoy my time at either of the Aussie banks I was at. So I decided to kind of take a break and figure out what I wanted to do next. So I took a little bit of time off and then figured, I knew this lovely man at a small boutique consulting company and thought, you know what, maybe, he's been talking to me about starting up some security services as part of their consulting practice. So I thought I'd explore that option a little bit further. And then that's kind of how it all started for me again, getting passionate and more interested in security and technology again. And I started up their security practice there, their consulting services. And then, I found UpGuard, which is where I currently work, and their products. And I thought, these products are perfect and they would accompany my services that I've created as part of the consulting practice. So I got them on board with us and then they kind of poached me. So it was quite interesting. And that's kind of where I'm at now. So I'm at UpGuard and I lead up their third-party risk management. I look after all our managed services customers, the service that we offer and the product as well that we offer. So, yeah, it's great. I love it.
Mm-hmm. So before we jump into third-party vendors, because I know you're really keen to dive on deep into this, for a lot of people out there would know that we do co-present a lot of the time. I can't even count to you how many times we've been on the same panel, definitely more than once. And one of the things that I always have a giggle at is when they announce your profile about your internal audit, external audit, there's another auditing function in there and I've probably forgotten it. So can you just give a bit of a synopsis on what you were sort of doing when it comes to the auditing side of things?
Yeah, of course. So all the auditing stuff kind of started at the Big Four, and it kind of just like followed me around from there because I always kind of do it in and out of each job, and I think it's important to anyway. So a lot of the internal audits we were doing were for a lot of customers that came through into the technology risk side of the practice when we were there. So when I was at the Big Four, there was the business risk side and the tech risk side. And so the tech risk side, we would go in, we'd agree with the customer, kind of talk through their business, talk through their processes, talk through their current control environment and kind of what worries them, what they kind of think about on the weekends or at night, what they can't sleep because of, and identify the risks that they're facing within their industry as well. And then from there, we'd go in and we'd kind of make a little audit plan and we would audit them against the risks and the controls that they say that they have and any controls that we would think they would need to have as per the industry, which could be anything from compliance, regulation, or just best practice as well, so from any of the standards that are also out there. And then you kind of just audit them against that. And while you're auditing, you also get them to kind of walk through the process, the controls, and then they also have to prove it as well. So they have to provide some sort of evidence, whether that's like a screenshot or show you any kind of email or anything else that's linked to that specific control.
So would you say as a fundamental skill set into what we're going to get into in a second, do you think having that auditing background and that mindset has really helped driven some of the complexities that you deal with today in terms of the third-party vendor risk management side of things and what you're sort of doing even at UpGuard today?
Yeah, 100%. So, I think auditing is a very important skill to have for anybody really, because, when you go into a job, when you go into a new job, and especially third-party risk, like you are assessing the third parties of whether that's the company you're working with, the third parties they have, you're assessing them, or you're assessing customers' third parties for them, which is the case of what I do now and what a lot of the other consulting practices would do as well for their customers. So you definitely need to be able to kind of take a step back, look at everything that they've provided you from whether they're answering a questionnaire or you're interviewing them or you're walking through processes with them. It's very much linked to the whole audit process. So when you do receive something that's completed and additional documentation, you need to look through that. You need to pinpoint whether or not that's matching up with that expectation that you have against, let's say, for example, a standard like ISO 27001. So when you're looking through those controls, you want to make sure that they are actually doing what the control says to a certain degree with what you're comfortable with. And that kind of closely also links to risk appetite as well. And it's dependent on, I guess, now we're going into a bit of complexity with it, but the kind of the rating that the vendor has, whether they're a high, medium or low rated vendor. And that's kind of tied back to what that third party vendor is providing you or your customer as a service.
I have to ask, have you ever done an audit in terms of you've been working with a client and they've claimed or they've made sort of this statement that they have this particular security control in place and you've audited them and you said, well, actually you don't, and it was completely falsified. Have you ever come across something like that?
I have come across that a couple of times in my career. So I've come across it while earlier on in my career when I was actually doing audit, and I can't say I've come across it too many times right now presently, because so in the past, like it's very easy for companies and people in certain roles to, kind of falsify or let's say maybe pretty up something that, they're trying to make it nice and shiny, but it's not really quite that shiny yet. And that's where, your auditing skill of diving deep into something and asking the right questions. And like you said, like listening intently, taking it in and kind of watching their body language as well. So if you are in the same room as them, like it's very important to kind of watch what they're doing and how they're saying certain things. And I feel like all of that kind of that entire picture will give it away to you, whether they are telling the truth or lying. And then obviously the evidence that you collect will also show that. In those instances, like we haven't had any super difficult customers or clients who have kind of pushed back on anything too much. If anything, a lot of the management, because you report to them in the end of the day in terms of what their control weaknesses are and if they've got any process failures. And it's more so they want to know what's actually going on, or they already know there's an issue. They just needed the proof for it to then go and do something about it.
So speaking of diving on deep, let's sort of get into the third party vendors side of thing. Now, I'd like to sort of set the scene, and if you could speak specifically on what are some examples of third-party vendors. And now I ask this because I think some people may think that it's only a IT service provider that could be a third party, but there's actually a lot more to it than that. So I'd love for you to just gain some clarity on this for people who don't know specifically on what those third-party vendors actually look like.
Yeah, of course. So third-party vendors are pretty much anyone and everyone that you would utilize outside of your company to either create, produce, or provide a product or service on behalf of your organization. So this could be, short or long-term contractors. This could be, call centers. So if you're externally sourcing the call center people and you're kind of outsourcing that to another company, you've got, mortgage processors as an example. So you've got, your brokers that you might deal with for a mortgage, and they kind of outsource a lot of things, and they get information from other places, and they kind of do send your information everywhere else. So that's another third party. You've got, who else is there? There's like text banking services. So, all those texts that you might get to confirm certain payments as well, or, texts that you get to confirm appointments, like if you've got a beauty appointment, hair appointment, doctor's appointment. So all those types of things that you kind of see on a daily basis are provided by a third party. So it's where that person or organization has outsourced that service or utilizing a product to provide a service.
So absolutely. Really appreciate you giving clarity on what the types of those vendors look like. So let's talk about some of the risks then associated with third parties. Like, what do you think really worries you as an individual?
I think for me as an individual, what worries me the most is the information that I even, and I'm sure this applies to so many people, that you freely kind of give away to different companies. And this can be via any kind of application you might use or have installed on your mobile phone, on your iPad, on your computers, laptops, any services that you kind of key in your email or subscribe to. So all of that kind of stuff is, we give out our information so freely and without even thinking that it does kind of freak me out, and it does scare me a little bit, because half of the time, and I'm guilty of doing this, I sign up for something or I do something, and it'll ask me for permissions to access my photos or videos or, something else on my phone. And I kind of just click OK without taking a step back to think about it. And most of the time it's because, I've got something in my head and I want to do that and I need it. So I'm going to do it, and I'm willing to accept that risk of handing over all my information. So for that, I'd say, my biggest scare are all those apps when you don't know how or who has created them, and, you don't know how secure they are most of the time. So that does worry me quite a lot personally. And then from a professional level, I would have to say, there's a lot of risk associated with third parties and outsourcing services and products and all of that. You need to really consider compliance risks. So that's massive. Obviously, we've got APRA here. You've got other standards that you might have as part of your risk appetite that companies need to comply with, like ISO 27001. You've got PCI DSS and a couple of others. There's plenty of cybersecurity risk to think about. That's kind of linked very closely to cloud risk and also, data breach and whether or not they've had one in the past and the likelihood of it occurring. And that's really dependent on the type of data they're going to collect, if they are going to collect any, and whether or not they're going to process it. So, you've got reputation risk, credit risk. There's like a whole bunch of different types of risks that are faced by organizations when it comes to third parties.
So do you think it's a fair assumption to say that organizations wouldn't know all of their parties? Now, I ask this, probably not in a small to medium-sized company, but definitely when you get up to a multinational and enterprise. I've worked in them myself, as you're well aware of. There are teams of people that do exactly your type of function internally to audit external vendors and do assessments on vendors, and they have their own sort of a criteria that they mark against those particular third parties and vendors. But would you still say that people, they're utilizing companies that in terms of across their organization that other people don't know that they're utilizing?
Oh, 100%. So you see this all the time, and I've seen it in the past working at various companies, and especially really large companies like our big banks. So, you have teams who will go out and they don't want to follow the normal procurement process. They don't want to ask IT if they can go and purchase this off-the-shelf product to use. So they'll just go and do it. And, it's very worrying, and you see it all the time. Like, it's very hard for IT and also risk to keep track of all of the different third parties for an organization. So you also see this in government as well, which is quite an issue for them because, these third parties half the time will have access and, doors that are wide open for them to kind of come in, log in and use and take things and read, the code and other things in their application, like information as they please. So yes, I do agree. And we see it all the time. And we even see it with some of our customers to this day. So, they don't know who most of their third parties are. They know they have thousands, but they're unable to kind of pull them all into one place and understand the level of risk that comes with each of those third parties.
How would you say companies today are so you're saying that, for example, people might have thousands of third-party vendors that they're leveraging. How would they go about monitoring these types of third parties? And then, I hate to say the word again, but auditing to see in terms of, like you just mentioned, if they've got access to something they shouldn't because they've got privileged information. How do you think companies are sort of managing it at the moment?
So I think a lot of companies do have some sort of register to go off because, a lot of companies have like that spend threshold. If you spend over 10,000 or 20,000, you need additional sign off and you need to follow a whole entire process. So for a lot of those, I think that sometimes the more money you do spend, the riskier it could be for that vendor. So for those ones, they generally do have a register and they have some sort of evidence and proof that they exist and what they're using them for. It's the ones that are smaller, and those ones, unfortunately, they are very hard to track down. A lot of it would have to be, quite a manual process. I know there are some automated tools out there, but some of those tools, the only things they'll really pick up is who is accessing what files and which applications and all of that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, with trying to find out which third parties, that's quite tough to do. And generally it's a manual process, like I said, and you would need to spend time speaking with a lot of the teams and managers and just understanding kind of what they're using, whether or not they've registered it as part of the procurement process or with the IT team if they do need IT's help to keep it up to date and all of that. So it is a tough process to do, but I think given our current compliance landscape, a lot of companies have kind of cleaned that up for themselves. And I think a lot of it also comes from, a lot of companies have done and performed like a data mapping exercise. And as part of that exercise, they've been able to kind of track all of their, confidential personal information that they held and kind of where they're sending it, where they're storing it, who's processing it for them. So that is a good exercise to use when you want to find out which third parties you're utilizing, because at the end of the day, that information it's very important to you. So, and your crown jewel information, that's your corporate secret information. You really want to keep that nutted down. So that exercise really does help you try to figure out who has access to it and where it's going, or if anyone has, read access to it. So yeah, that's one thing I would strongly suggest performing.
So you just touched on regulation then and compliance. So would you say that was the catalyst to people being more compelled to take this more seriously? Because at the end of the day, as we know, in risk management and security and IT, everyone's to-do lists are never ending, and it's like another thing that they have to now do. But because their backs against the wall, they have to do it. Do you think because of compliance and regulation that it's made people more aware to the fact that they need to understand who their third parties are, but then also ensuring that they are compliant and they're being held accountable now because of these certain regulations that are out there?
Yeah, 100%. So, I know for a fact when I was doing the consulting gig at the previous role, we had such a big influx of questions and requests to come in and help a lot of our clients back then to be in line with, APRA's Prudential Standard CPS 234, which kind of caused quite a spin for everybody and kind of caused a little bit of a panic. And then you had, the notifiable data breach regulation as well by the government. So a lot of these compliance requirements, obviously depending on which industry you're in and what you need to comply with, has definitely kind of given a bit of a kick to a lot of these organizations to get their ducks in line and to make sure that they understand every single avenue of risk that is presented to them as part of, whether that's third party or their cybersecurity risk, which leads to, their cybersecurity posture. And, third parties, it's such a big part of that. So that's why, you'll see a lot of the regulations now focusing on it, because there never really has been a big enough focus on that when it comes to security.
So you touched on certain industries are more regulated than others. So as we know, finance, health, those sorts of things. What about those industries that fall outside of those buckets? Would you say that a lot of them have still got a lot of issues when it comes to security and potentially being breached because their backs aren't against the wall? They don't have to comply because they're not forced to, because they're not in finance or they're not in health. So they kind of have a less compelling argument to go and spend more money with consultants to go and do these types of these audits and monitoring type of functions.
Yeah, 100%. So, we see a lot now with some of our customers that we do perform their assessments for them. We'll see that some of their vendors will be like, well, we don't need to comply with CPS 234 as an example. So, we just do best practice and we align ourselves with ISO 27001 as an example. So when it comes to that, you kind of need to take a step back and revisit that vendor in terms of what the risk rating is for that vendor. If something was to happen, if a data breach was to occur, would it really impact your business? Would it impact your organization? And you need to kind of take into consideration, all your reputation risk, op risk, financial risk. You've got your cybersecurity risks with, data leaks and all of that kind of stuff. So thinking about that rating of that vendor and whether or not it's worth doing business with them over the long run. So whether the opportunity kind of outweighs the risk. So, and that really comes down to organizations kind of looking at their vendors from a different lens. And that will come, I think a lot of them are doing it now very slowly, especially our customers, a lot of them we're seeing. So they'll take the assessment and sometimes it'll take them back and they'll be like, wow, like I didn't realize they were either that bad or that great. And, those vendors who do say we're not going to comply or we're not going to align ourselves with XYZ, unfortunately, you will need to rethink the kind of business you're doing with them or the level of business you're doing with them. So kind of taking it a step back and also renegotiating the contract terms. So that does also come into play in this whole process. Another thing is, a lot of them do want to try and align themselves with some of these standards and regulations just because they are best practice. And a lot of them know that maybe majority, if not half of their revenue is coming from, certain industries that are highly regulated. So they will automatically try to align themselves, or because they won't be able to become regulated by those bodies, they would just be able to align themselves with it and provide some sort of certification or audit report to prove that they are aligned with those regulations.
So when you hear a vendor say, CPS 234, I'm not being highly regulated anyway, it doesn't really apply to me, what's sort of your response from that, being a risk professional yourself?
Yeah, so, that kind of commentary and that kind of attitude, it's disappointing to see and hear, especially, given we're in 2020 now and, cybersecurity is very important for every organization. And the risk that comes with it and doing business with many different vendors is so high now. And, when I hear that, it does disappoint me a lot. And it kind of says to me that they don't care and, it's not important to them. And that really, it worries me a lot. And normally when a vendor acts in that way and they're not responsible and they don't complete an assessment or complete a questionnaire or whichever way you're assessing them, they don't complete it properly or truthfully, the truth will always come out. Because, when you do ask for evidence and things to back them up with that, and you look at the contract and you ask for certain things that they're supposed to provide in that contract and they can't deliver, you then know that that's red flags right there. Mm-hmm. And, as part of the assessments we do as well is we kind of go and check out whether there's been any data leaks out there for certain vendors. So, if we do see anything or find anything, we do let our customers know. And then that's something for them to kind of talk to with the vendor. And that shows us immediate red flags, obviously, because they do have control breakdowns and they're not doing what they're saying that they're doing in the assessment. So
I've worked in an organisation before where we had a third party, and apparently part of the contract was to say once per annum, we as the company have the right to, or I think it was we or an external had to pen test that particular organization. They had to provide us with the report. Their pushback was, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to pen test it ourselves, which completely defeats the whole purpose of it. What sort of response to something like that? Is that fairly common that you'd hear people sort of not wanting to participate in certain, like you said, reports and to show that, I mean, the whole reason we were trying to initiate that was to see if there was any vulnerabilities, anything that we should be aware of from an external perspective to ensure that we continue using these guys?
Yeah, so, those conversations and discussions are always really tough to have. And, we have seen in the past where, some vendors have said, oh, we don't want to do that, but we've done this already and here's a completed copy of it. So please feel free to review that and then come back to us with any questions. And, we've had instances where they don't want to send certain reports or they don't want to send certain evidences. And I guess you can go and take it down the path of looking at the contract and pointing out, as you said, what they've said that they will provide annually. But if you don't have the correct wording in your contracts, you cannot kind of force them on the word of the contract. But if they breach the contract and you've put in there that they need to, you're allowed to do a pen test on them once per year, then you can actually stop the current product or service or whatever they're providing for you until such activity is completed. The other way, I mean, that's one extreme, right? But then I think the other side of it is, trying to work together to come to kind of like a mutual agreement would be, okay, yes, they want to do their own pen test. So maybe working together to find a reputable company who does pen testing that you kind of both agree on, and then, agreeing on kind of the scope, a high level scope maybe of the pen test, and coming to an agreement on that. And then they can kind of go ahead and continue along with the penetration test if they wish to do so. But I guess what comes with that is the cost element and whether they're going to pay for it or your organization is going to pay for it. So that's also something that would need to be nutted out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go into details about perhaps something that has gone wrong with the third party. And I think this is really important, that I'm not sort of trying to position this in a negative light. I really want to position it as in positively and to get yourself to sort of answer some of the questions that people are likely to have. But I feel sometimes people are afraid to speak more openly about this stuff because they may feel it makes them look weak or vulnerable. And I think that sort of simulating this type of situation would be highly beneficial to a lot of the listeners out there. So I'm really keen to sort of explore with you, perhaps give me an example when something has gone wrong, and then let's sort of like walk through what that looks like in detail.
Yeah, 100%. So more recently, actually, and it's still kind of like an ongoing situation for one of our customers, we provide a managed service for them. So we look after their third-party vendor risk management. So we do all of the assessments for them. And once we've finalized everything, we kind of hand it back to them. And then that's when they go and, run it through their internal risk processes. So for one of them, it's actually quite a big vendor who you would think would be a bit more, let's say, cooperative and mature with how they approach, performing certain tasks. And they completed the questionnaire, and that was fine. They sent it back, and reading through their responses and reading through kind of what they've done and what they've left blank in that assessment was very interesting to see for me. And it was very concerning because, they came back with a really, really low score, which was pretty much a fail. They had a very, very high number of risks, which I found quite interesting because I was like, surely this company, they're quite large. They wouldn't have, such huge risks in their organization, otherwise no one would do business with them. And it came down to them not taking the assessment seriously, not wanting to do it. They've done so many of them already. And the person who did it was very frustrated and quite angry. And so, this is still kind of like a kind of situation that's working in progress with them. But what's happened is they have halted some of the services that this company provides to our customer, and it's going through an internal review. Mm-hmm. And they're going kind of a little bit back and forth now with that vendor. And it is very interesting, and it's quite disappointing to see because, you would expect some company of that size to be a bit more mature and appropriate with how they handle these situations.
So why do you think they're not being mature and appropriate towards this particular situation, or perhaps others that are out there as well?
Yeah, so I think what's happened is, as you know, like for a lot of these companies, you've got a lot of the regulations and a lot of legal and government requirements that they need to assess all of their third parties by a certain date. So because of the short period of time, and I imagine that they have other customers also sending them all of these types of questionnaires, surveys, and assessments to complete, they've gotten frustrated. And I imagine it's a resource issue because they've only got a few people over there who kind of look after this, and it's only one fraction of their job. So I think what's happened is they've just gotten pissed off. They've gotten pretty angry, and they're just like, stuff this. I don't want to do this. So I'm just going to do it like however I like. And, it's not essentially, yes, that person is at fault to a certain degree, but it also brings to light what a lot of organizations face, and that's resourcing issues and not knowing how to properly handle or having a proper process for third-party risk management.
So because of this company has behaved in a certain way that you don't agree with, what type of implications has that sort of created for this particular organization that are going through this review process, have potentially stopped their services? What does that sort of look like?
So I think it does look quite bad for them, and I think they're quite lucky that the customer isn't making this more public or taking it a little further than what they already have. They're kind of actually working really well together with them, trying to come to a mutual agreement. And like I just think that this makes them look really bad, because the customer is now kind of thinking, do we want to re-sign our contract with them in the future when it comes to renewal? And they're already thinking about making changes to the contract in terms of the terms and conditions of it and the level of service that they're providing. So I think they're already starting to think about moving away from them, regardless of whether or not this gets fixed up and solution comes to play here. I think it's just kind of tarnished their reputation a little bit with the way that they've reacted, and especially with no one else kind of reviewing or having a look over this questionnaire before it was submitted.
So when a situation like this goes a little sour, what do sort of the relationships look like after an incident like this with a particular vendor occurs? Like, what is likely to sort of happen?
I think in this case, it will be interesting to see what happens with them. But speaking with, our main contact there, who we provide the reports to and all of that, they've kind of said that this is really poor form on the vendor's half, because, they do pay them quite a large amount of money as well. So they are kind of looking over their contract, and they've gotten a fair few different people involved from their organisation, including legal, and they're just trying to work out the best way to go about it for the moment. And then I think in the future, they're kind of rethinking of which direction to go with them. And I'm not sure if it will end mutually or not. I'm not sure how they will go about that. But I personally think that once, a vendor makes that kind of mistake with such a large customer, then, it kind of does raise some flags that they need to do some epic process changes and some new resource allocation, because it's not fair and it's not right, because you are damaging, your revenue stream and your sales, to have such a big name on your portfolio, and then for them to kind of go missing it's not very good.
So one of the things I'm sort of gathering as you talk through this is that it's likely that the guys internally with the client will probably be reviewing the contract and then adding in more terms and conditions in conjunction with their legal team. What do you think in these types of scenarios? What is sort of the learning that happens because of this? And as you alluded to before around loss of revenues, it's sort of that retrospectively, we should have just fixed a whole bunch of that stuff because now we've lost our biggest customer. Is that sort of some of the thought processes that happen when these types of things occur, unfortunately?
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately that is it. And not only that, but like a lot of these old contracts don't actually have more of the current, terms and conditions that new contracts have, especially around, things with data. So personally identifiable information, the handling of that, the handling of breaches and information security incidents, and the level of access to the information that they're holding. So kind of all of that is it will get kind of added into the contract to a certain extent, and that'll come with, them being able to do an audit maybe once a year with a certain X amount of days that they need to give them notice with, and probably some reporting as well on their security, and access reviews as well to the data or the information that they're handling. So all of this will get added into the contract. And, what will also come with that is the report that we provided them. We did highlight some other risks which were a little bit concerning. They weren't as high or extreme as some others, but, they are kind of the foundations of certain controls and processes that you should have in place. So they will probably bring to light a lot of the issues that did come up from the report. And that does include some of the stuff that was found with the data leaks assessment. So they will talk to them about that and probably add certain terms into the contract to make sure that they are complying with those certain controls, yes.
So what I'd like to sort of talk about now with you is talking about the automation side of things when it comes to vendor risk management. Now, I know that we all know that there's a lot of false positives when it comes to stuff like this in terms of monitoring, but can you provide a clear insight to how this would kind of work?
Yeah, of course. So, you can automate your vendor risk management program. Unfortunately, you probably won't be automating the entire program because you still need an element of, humanness to it, where you need to review what's come back and you need to make a judgment whether or not, the company is willing to accept certain risks or they want to progress with asking for remediation for certain risks that they found as part of the assessment. So what we do is we do have an automated process, and you'll find a lot of other companies that do provide these services as well, where you have a particular software and you add in the vendor that you want to kind of track and trace and assess. And what's good with automating is you get an ongoing kind of assessment process based on their web footprint, which is live, and it's their public web footprint, so you can scan for as long as you want, and you get a specific score kind of spat out to you, and that gives you a rough place of where this vendor is sitting and how many risks they currently have open. And our software, which is great, where it gives you kind of the outline of all of the risks and which risks and checks that they've passed, which ones they've failed. And it's important that when you are automating as well, that you don't just want to see the things that they're all doing wrong and that's where you stop. You want to see how they would be able to remediate these risks and fix them, and giving some pointers and tips, and also comparing it to the industry averages as well. And you want to be able to benchmark them across your other vendors that you have, and maybe in that same industry as well. So when you do automate, you also want to make sure that when you do send, a questionnaire or an assessment, that you're able to track and trace that all through kind of one tool. And I think a lot of companies struggle with that at the moment because they are performing a lot of these manually. So you will see a lot of Excel spreadsheets flying around, maybe Word documents, and then as they're communicating with their vendors, they're doing that through email. So they're easily losing sight of, how many times they've contacted them, what they've asked them, like how many more times they need to follow up before they need to have a phone call or bring the contracts team into it or whatever else they need to do. So when you do automate it, it's great because you've got all of that in the one place and you don't have to go searching for these things. So, it's all, you've got your audit trail, you've got your timelines of when you've you can set reminders. So it kind of removes all of that manual processing for you, and it makes it a lot easier, and it kind of cuts your time in half that you spend on each vendor. And that means you can cover more vendors as part of your vendor risk management program. And it doesn't mean that you're fully automating it where you don't need human interaction with it. You still need the human element because you still need to be able to make that judgment call of whether or not, you're willing to accept these vendors for how they are, or if you need to request for certain remediation with the vendor for some of the risks that they have because it's in breach of contract or it's just in breach of a regulation or a certain standard that you're following with them. So, when you do automate, that remediation process also sits within that tool as well. So it's kind of all in one place and you can track and go as you please.
Okay, so I'm a company. I have 500 vendors. Well, I know I have 500 vendors, to be clear.
Yeah.
I bring you guys in from UpGuard. You would have continuous monitoring on all of those vendors.
Yeah.
And then would I, just say I'm the risk manager, would I then go into your portal, log in, and to be able to see those assessments in terms of how they're sort of taking place, like you mentioned before? And would you guys have capability to send automated reports? So if I needed to check weekly around what was sort of happening, would you guys automate that too to see where things are sort of sitting?
Yeah, so yeah, we can definitely do that. You do receive notifications as well. Like if a vendor's score drops, by 100 points or 50 points, and new risks are introduced, you get notifications on that straight away. On the assessment process as well, once a questionnaire is completed and submitted, you receive notifications about that. And when an assessment is completed and published, so you can receive weekly updates, weekly reports, or you can log in and do it yourself. It's not difficult as well at all. It's very easy to read, very easy to follow. And there are summaries and dashboards which are customizable. So you can add which vendors you want to track in that as you please. And you can add competitors in as well and track them. So it's quite interesting. And everything is in one place, which makes it extremely easy, especially when it comes to auditing time with the regulators, if you are being regulated by any of them.
Would you say that a lot of the issues that have arisen, traditionally speaking, has been because, like you said, it's been very piecemeal, Word docs, Excel spreadsheets. Someone's at the organization, someone can't find that Excel spreadsheet that's buried somewhere. And then, like you mentioned before, that people tend to just do whatever they want. So would you say that because there's been so much disparity across a company and not a lot of unification, would you say that's why there's a lot of issues that people would have traditionally, but now we're sort of moving into a time where companies like yourself, in terms of UpGuard, help centralizing that process to ensure that things don't go by the wayside?
Yeah, 100%. So, I've seen it in my previous roles. When you're trying to help a customer get their ducks in line with third-party risk management, and they don't know where half the things are, and a lot of people will, as you see all the time, people saving things to their computers, and they're updating documents as they go from their desktop, which is not best practice, but a lot of organizations allow it and a lot of people do it. And so then that, immediately gets removed from whatever drive it's sitting in, that's the central kind of location to store these documents. And then immediately you lose that. You lose it, you don't know where it is, you lose the versions. And like you said, when people leave, they don't hand over the process. And a lot of the time people are kind of, the process that they've matured or kind of gotten down pat is in their head, and it's how they do it in their mind, and they don't really write it down, and it's not really anywhere else for someone else to come and pick it up and be able to run with it. So you do run like quite a few risks there, and a lot of the time they have to start from scratch, which is not ideal, but if you are following that manual process, unfortunately that's what happens, and it takes you a lot longer. And these automated tools, which you said centralize and make it a lot easier, like what we provide, not only does it make it easier for an organization to assess their vendors, but also it makes the vendor's life a little bit easier as well, because they don't have to worry about this Excel spreadsheet getting sent around through email, which may or may not be secure, and also various copies of them flying around in their organization because they're passing it to every Tom, Dick and Harry in different teams to complete it. And then you've got to kind of put everything into one version. Do you know what I mean? Like the version controlling is a lot better and easier as well. So
oh my God, I feel stressed listening to this. Would you also say, because you guys are cloud-based as well, I mean, I've been having a lot of conversations around cloud and SaaS and these types of things. It's just easier because, I mean, if I'm so-and-so working in an office and I'm responsible for the spreadsheet that gets sent around to every man and his dog in the company, then I've somewhat lost it in the version control and I can't roll it back to 10 versions ago because I've lost the last 10 as well.
Yep.
I would say it just makes it a lot easier because I can access that when I'm at home as well. Like I don't need to then physically be in the office, or if I'm trying to remote in through some VPN that doesn't work and the whole thing's being slowed down because everyone is trying to do the same thing. What are you sort of seeing in terms of future state? Is this going to be a thing that just happens? I mean, I've been speaking to a lot of people on and off the podcast about cloud adoption and SaaS and being very fluid in how we operate our businesses, whether it's in the office, at home, or on a beach somewhere. What do you sort of see the future of that looking like? Will people just have to adopt to this way of operating? And if they don't, then they're going to have a lot of problems?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's not only problems in terms of, their processing and, keeping everything in one place, but, SaaS is easy, right? It's easier than going and purchasing some fancy schmancy product out of a box, which then you need about 50 people from the company to come in for 2 weeks and try to make it fit into your organization, and changing all these different little, like codes and how a certain screen looks and all of that crap. So like it's easy, it's simple, it doesn't need to be installed. You don't need to worry about any of that. You don't need to worry about it protruding your network and sitting on a certain server that you have your crown jewels in as well. Like it's so easy. You log in, you can have single sign-on setup. It integrates with other applications and other systems you're using in-house, like, your help desk stuff or your risk management software. So it's just simple, and it doesn't require a large amount of effort from the point that you purchase the product to when you use the product. It is so slimlined. It is so easy. Like, as when you log into Google and you want to sign up as a customer, it doesn't take 2 weeks to get started with them. It's so quick. You sign up, you log in, you're done. You just got to set up your users. You put in, you punch in whatever you want to put in there, and you're set to go. And that's what we're kind of aiming at here by being a SaaS provider. Is we're so simple. Like, once you do your trial, like you've set up your account, and it's just once you decide to go ahead, that becomes your account, and you've already done all the hard work from your trial in terms of setting up your vendors, your labeling, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's easy, and I think that's what a lot of our customers love about it. And it's nice to look at, it's easy to use, and gives you what you need.
No, I 100%, I totally agree. Yeah. So Tulin, I really appreciate your time today and your knowledge and your insight. And I think this is definitely a very big area and topic of conversation. And I definitely want to get you on here to really shed some insight on these questions that I believe a lot of people are asking out there. So if people are wanting to ask you a question, perhaps that I didn't ask you myself, how can they go about doing that?
So yeah, for sure. Like, go ahead and contact me through LinkedIn. I'm on there quite a bit. Add me through there and send me a personal message. And we can go from there, whether that's a discussion we have over the phone or a coffee or something. I'm more than happy to help and answer any questions people may have in relation to vendor risk management, because there's never one way that fits all that for everyone to do. So everyone's approaches and processes are different, and yeah, I would love to know, and I would love to help where possible.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Tulin. I really, really do appreciate your time, and I'm sure our listeners have gained a lot of insight from this conversation. So thanks again.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. As always, we hope you got some new ideas or ways of thinking from this episode. And remember, you can always reach out to our guests if you do have more questions. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, and we always love to hear your feedback. So leave a review on iTunes, and we might just give you a shout out on a future episode. You can find me on LinkedIn, as well as on @IamCarissaBreen on Twitter and Instagram. And if you'd like to know more about how we help tech companies, check out carissabreenindustries.com. Until next time, stay safer.